Erhard Milch's story is one of power, controversy, and the making of an air force that would shake the world. He was not a daring pilot like Göring, nor a technical genius like Messerschmitt. He was an organizer, a builder. And in a regime obsessed with control, men like Milch became indispensable. Born on March 30, 1892, in the port city of Wilhelmshaven, Milch came from a respectable, if complicated, family. His father, Anton, was a pharmacist. His mother, Clara Vetter, came from a wealthier background. But early in his career, questions about his parentage surfaced. There were rumors that his father was Jewish, a dangerous accusation in the racial hierarchy of Nazi Germany. When Hitler came to power, such a fact could have ended Milch's career overnight. But Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, personally intervened, signing papers that proved Milch was of pure Aryan descent. In Nazi politics, loyalty and usefulness often outweighed ideology. Milch's military life began during World War I. He started as an artillery officer, but transferred to the Imperial German Air Service in 1915, serving as an aircraft observer. Wounded in 1917, he spent the rest of the war in administrative roles. Not in the cockpit, but behind the scenes, where he found his true strength: organization. When Germany lost the war, the Treaty of Versailles banned it from having an air force. But the passion for flight never disappeared. A generation of pilots and engineers refused to give up, and Milch was among them. In the early 1920s, he joined the Junkers Aircraft Company, and by 1926, he became managing director of Deutsche Luftwaffe. Under Milch's leadership, Luftwaffe became a front for rearmament. Officially, it was a civilian airline. Secretly, it was training pilots and testing technology for a future air force. Milch ran it like a military unit, efficient, strict, and relentless. He demanded perfection from subordinates and personally oversaw every operation. It made him feared, but it also made him successful. By the early 1930s, Milch was a respected figure in aviation circles. And when Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, Hermann Göring, a former ace himself, needed professionals who could turn Hitler's dream of an air force into reality. Milch was an obvious choice. He became state secretary of the newly formed Reich Air Ministry, effectively Göring's right-hand man. 2 years later, on March 1, 1935, Hitler announced the creation of the Luftwaffe. Göring became its commander-in-chief, and Milch its chief architect. While Göring loved spectacle and titles, Milch focused on discipline, production, and results. He built the structure, the logistics, and the system that would allow the Luftwaffe to expand rapidly. He favored reliable, easily produced aircraft, like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighter and the Heinkel He-11 bomber, over experimental designs. His philosophy was simple: quantity wins wars. By the late 1930s, the Luftwaffe had become one of the most formidable air forces in the world: fast, powerful, and terrifyingly efficient. But beneath that success, cracks were already forming, cracks that would widen as the world moved toward another great war. When Hitler's armies invaded Poland in September 1939, Erhard Milch's vision was finally put to the test. The Luftwaffe unleashed a storm of destruction across the Polish skies, dive bombers screaming down upon cities and troops, crushing resistance with terrifying precision. To the world, it looked like an unstoppable machine. To Milch, it was the realization of everything he had built over the past decade. His production system worked like clockwork. Bombers and fighters rolled off assembly lines faster than any other air force in Europe could manage. Logistics ran smoothly. Replacement parts and crews arrived on time. It was a triumph of organization and of Milch's relentless control. When the Blitzkrieg swept across Western Europe in 1940, the Luftwaffe again played a central role. French and British forces were overwhelmed by its speed and coordination. Göring basked in the glory, but behind the scenes, it was Milch who made it possible. Hitler recognized his contribution. On July 19, 1940, Erhard Milch, a man who had never commanded troops in battle, was promoted to Field Marshal, one of the highest ranks in the German military. It was a rare honor and a sign of how powerful he had become. But that same year, cracks began to show. The Battle of Britain tested every assumption behind the Luftwaffe's design. Milch's doctrine of mass production and short-range bombing, so effective in Poland and France, failed against Britain's defenses. German aircraft lacked range and endurance, and their strategic goals were confused. The Luftwaffe was built for lightning wars, not prolonged aerial campaigns. Milch's response was to double down on production. He believed the problem was not design, but numbers. He pushed factories harder, demanding more aircraft, more parts, more speed. But no amount of efficiency could make up for strategic misjudgment. The skies over Britain became a graveyard for the Luftwaffe's reputation. Still, Milch maintained his authority. He was not a man to admit mistakes, nor was Göring, who preferred to blame his subordinates. Their partnership began to fracture. Milch resented Göring's extravagance in political games. Göring, in turn, distrusted Milch's growing influence and harsh discipline. By 1941, Germany's attention turned east. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, presented an even greater challenge. Milch was now responsible for supplying aircraft across thousands of miles of hostile terrain. The Luftwaffe initially achieved stunning victories, destroying entire Soviet air fleets on the ground. But the vastness of the Eastern Front stretched Milch's system to the breaking point. Factories struggled to keep up. Aircraft wore out faster than they could be replaced. Pilots were exhausted. Fuel was running short. Milch tried to maintain control through sheer force of will, issuing more orders, demanding more output, reorganizing production lines. But the Luftwaffe's early advantage was slipping away. By the end of 1941, the German Air Force was no longer the unstoppable machine it once appeared to be. The seeds of its downfall were already planted, and Erhard Milch, the man who built it, was about to find himself fighting not just a war in the air, but a war inside his own empire. By 1943, the dream of German air superiority had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Allied bombers filled the skies, striking deep into the heart of the Reich. Factories burned, transport networks collapsed, and the once proud Luftwaffe was on the defensive. Erhard Milch, now one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, faced the impossible task of saving an air force that was dying from within. He responded with ruthless efficiency. In early 1944, he helped establish the Jägerstab, or Fighter Staff, a special committee dedicated to increasing fighter aircraft production at any cost. Milch, alongside Albert Speer, the Reich's Minister of Armaments, reorganized the entire German aviation industry. Their mission was clear: flood the skies with fighters, especially the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the revolutionary jet-powered Me 262. Milch believed production could still turn the tide. He demanded longer hours, stricter discipline, and the total mobilization of Germany's remaining industrial resources. Under his command, the Jägerstab pushed output to its highest levels of the war. But behind the numbers lay a grim reality. The factories were filled with forced laborers, prisoners of war, concentration camp inmates, and civilians dragged from occupied countries. They worked under brutal conditions, often starving, beaten, and dying beside the machines that built Milch's planes. The efficiency of the Jägerstab came at a horrifying human cost. Milch's relationship with Albert Speer, once a cautious partnership, grew increasingly tense. Speer was the master of political maneuvering, while Milch remained a blunt, military-minded organizer. Speer began to see Milch as a rival, someone too old-fashioned, too ruthless, and too closely tied to Göring. When Hitler started to favor Speer as the Reich's new miracle manager, Milch's influence began to fade. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe's situation worsened. Despite record production numbers, the planes couldn't reach the front in time, and fuel shortages rendered many useless. Allied bombing raids destroyed airfields and factories faster than Milch could rebuild them. By late 1944, Germany's once mighty air force was in ruins. The jet fighter program, which Milch had supported, came too late. Bureaucratic chaos, technical delays, and Hitler's obsession with using jets as bombers crippled its potential. Milch, furious at the waste and incompetence, lashed out at subordinates, calling them traitors to Germany's future. But it was clear the future he had tried to control was collapsing around him. In the final months of the war, Milch found himself sidelined by Speer and cut off from Göring, who was now spiraling into drug addiction and paranoia. The Reich was crumbling, the skies belonged to the Allies, and the man who had once built Germany's most feared air fleet now presided over its ashes. As the Red Army closed in from the east and Allied forces advanced from the west, Milch's factories lay in ruins. His system of total control, the one that had once symbolized German power, was gone, and with it, his place in Hitler's inner circle. As the Reich fell apart in 1945, Erhard Milch knew that his time was running out. The once feared architect of the Luftwaffe, the man who had controlled Germany's vast air production empire, was now a fugitive in his own shattered nation. Allied bombers roared overhead. The cities he once built planes to protect now reduced to rubble. When Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker, Milch's world collapsed completely. Göring, his former patron and rival, surrendered to the Americans. Albert Speer negotiated his own survival, and Milch, who had spent years commanding others, found himself alone, hiding in the chaos of post-war Germany. He was captured by Allied troops in May 1945 near Lübeck, disguised in civilian clothes. Reports say he tried to pose as a simple worker, but his distinctive appearance and arrogance gave him away. When interrogated, Milch insisted he had served Germany faithfully and denied any involvement in war crimes. But the evidence told another story. At the Nuremberg trials, Milch was not part of the main proceedings against the top Nazi leadership. Instead, he became the central figure in the Milch trial. One of the follow-up trials focused specifically on war crimes in the Luftwaffe and the armaments industry. The charges were grave: exploiting slave labor and prisoners of war for aircraft production, inhumane treatment of forced laborers under the Jägerstab program, involvement in medical experiments on concentration camp inmates. Throughout the trial, Milch maintained an icy composure. He denied knowledge of atrocities, claiming he had only been an administrator, not a murderer. But witness testimonies and thousands of documents painted a damning picture. He had overseen a vast system built on suffering, and though he never personally pulled a trigger, his orders had condemned thousands to die in factories and camps. On April 17, 1947, the verdict was delivered. Erhard Milch was found guilty on 2 of 3 counts and sentenced to life imprisonment. For a man who had once commanded empires of steel and fire, it was a humiliating end. Yet, even in prison, he never expressed remorse. He saw himself as a soldier punished for doing his duty. Over time, his sentence was reduced, first to 15 years, then to 10, amid growing Cold War tensions and the West's need to rebuild Germany as an ally. In 1954, after serving only 7 years, Erhard Milch was released from Landsberg prison, the same place where Hitler had written Mein Kampf decades earlier. He lived quietly in Dusseldorf, writing memoirs and defending his wartime record. "I did what any loyal German would have done," he claimed in an interview. But few believed him. Milch died in 1972, at the age of 79, largely forgotten by the public and despised by history. His legacy remains one of contradictions. A man of brilliance and cruelty, efficiency and inhumanity. He built one of the most powerful air forces the world had ever seen, only to watch it burn in the ruins of the empire he served. In the end, Erhard Milch's story is not just about war or machines. It's about how ambition, when bound to tyranny, becomes destruction. The same discipline and intellect that built the Luftwaffe also helped destroy millions of lives. And as history shows, even the most efficient evil leaves behind nothing but silence.